All right, welcome back to this episode of Your Five Letter Word. Today I have Christel, founder of Shift Energetics, with us, and I'm excited to jump right in. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you. Could you tell us a little bit more about who you are
Yeah,
and what you
well,
do?
I'm a former access consciousness facilitator turned coach. I am in the process of choosing whether or not I'm a full on business coach or if I'm really facilitating people to create lives that they love. So, watch this space. But I've been facilitating consciousness for a long time, and I really empower people to know that they know, to create a life and a business that they love, and to thrive.
Nice. I love
Thanks.
that. What does authenticity mean to you?
Oh, I have a few takes on it. One, I think it's a little bit overused right now, and I don't know if we really know what we're saying when we say authentic anymore. To me, it's being me. And that's so broad, but that's because I'm broad. That's like I can run every single spectrum and gamut and thing, but if I am not being me, that's when everything in my world gets crunched up. So, I guess simply put, authenticity to me is being myself. I think a lot of us try to go define ourselves so that we can be ourselves, so that we can find ourselves, so that we can do ourselves instead of just allowing ourselves to be. And that's really kind of been my journey over the last 10 years. But you asked another question that I can't remember now.
Yeah. Yeah, what's your journey been like finding yourself and really finding what it means to be you? Because I like how you said it. We all look for definitions and labels and like boxes to put ourselves in, and then that almost defeats the
It
purpose from
completely
my
defeats the
perspective.
purpose, but we're not trying to do that. I think we're just trying to find some sort of solid ground to stand on. I've been a seeker my whole life for sure. I'm going to be 50 next year. But the last 10 years of my life, I really went after consciousness. And I didn't know what that was when I found it. I was just trying to be happy and I wanted to have good relationships. Those were my two asks. And at the time, I was really, really emotionally volatile and just very depressed, anxious, suicidal, freaked out about life, overthinking everything. Um, and so I was looking for a little emotional stability. I found Access Consciousness Bars, which is this body process that just totally defrags your hard drive. Like you either feel like you had a great day at the spa or your life changes. And my life changed. And then I found out I could practice this stuff. So I got certified. And I spent the next 10 years just traveling the world and doing videos and facilitating and creating change with myself and other people. And the reason my business was so successful is I was seeing so much change. So I was getting a lot of access to me. And I was one of those people that grew up, I was a little snowflake perfectionist that just wanted everybody to be happy. So, absorbed everything and tried to fix everything. And I called myself the peacemaker in my siblings. So I just had a lot of stuff to where I wasn't being myself, where I was trying to be the cool kid or the smart kid or the perfect kid or anything but me. And basically, my underlying point of view underneath all of that is if people really saw me, one, they wouldn't like me. Two, they'd be shocked. Three, they'd find out whatever kind of person I thought I was. And so I spent a lot of years trying to be what I thought would create something good. And turns out people choose what they choose, and it had nothing to do with me really. And I could just be myself. But yeah, the last 10 years have just been like an unlocking of that. How can I be more me? How can I have more of my voice, be more of the energy that I am, not stop myself when I'm worrying that I'm being too much, just allow myself to be me in whatever space and energy that I am. So it's been a big journey, actually, especially the last 10 years.
Yeah, you said some really good things in there. Starting with the idea of, I feel like many of us go down this journey thinking we're looking for one thing, and usually it's something small, intangible in a sense. And then we go down all these other ways that we never expected. Um, but also to your point of growing up and putting yourself into all these boxes and labels and thinking it's through the external validation and through other people's perceptions of if how we're putting ourselves in these boxes is valid or not. And then that gives us our sense of self. So I definitely identify with that. I had a moment when I was in grade 5. So what is that, like 10, 11, where a teacher came up to me spontaneously and was like, "Hey, you look like you can run." we're short someone on the track team. Do you want to do the like 1600-meter race? And I was like, sure. And I went home to my dad and I was like, I'm doing this. Like, what am I doing? He's like, oh, like you're going to go and you're going to like sprint 4 laps around the track. I was like, cool. And
No point of view that you
then, so
couldn't
then
do
I
it. You're
like
just
trained
like,
for
what
it.
is this?
Yeah. I was like, all right. Like at that point I had like a semi identity as an athlete. So I was like, all right, cool. Like I'll train for this. But it was in that moment that everyone else is like, oh, okay, Christina's a runner. And then like the rest of like middle school, high school, everyone was like, Christina's a runner. And then I
Yes,
was
I'm
like,
a
okay, I have
runner.
to run. So
Yeah.
there's
Oh,
a
yeah. There's
lot
a
to that
lot.
relationship
Totally.
with like
Yeah. My mom did that
labels.
for me in regards to, she would always say what a hard worker I was. You're such a hard worker. And I got so much
Mm,
praise for that. I didn't even know till years later. And I'm still unraveling that in my life. I got so much positive. The way I would talk about it with access consciousness stuff is like, I got so much positive judgment for it, meaning it wasn't, I think we assume that judgment is
mm,
negative, but you can have positive judgment, which actually sticks you harder because you're like, but I like this validation for this thing that's killing me. Um, and so I would always go after working
yeah,
hard instead of working easy because you don't get praised for working easy, you know?
I feel like I'm a little bit like right now. Positive judgment. Yeah, no. Same thing for me. It was like I would get I don't want to say paid, but for every A that I would get on my
Yes.
report card, it was like,
Yes.
here's an extra
Similar.
$10. Completely driven
Performance.
by I want that money. I have things I want to buy.
Totally.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's definitely a good mindset shift, even for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for that. Yeah. So then, going through this journey and embracing your authentic voice, finding your weirdness, how has
It's a
that
process.
transformed the way that you? Yeah, but what's the shift you've seen in your own, let's say, approach to business and the results you're getting in business, just embracing that like weirdness,
Yeah.
as you call it?
Well, I would say it's a process. So I think I have to answer this sort of circularly because, when your business is a great facilitator of self. As soon as you start a business and you have an idea and you're like, this is going to be a good idea, and you get out in the marketplace and you start creating content and putting stuff out there, you all of a sudden learn it's not just about having a good idea. It's about all these other things, and it brings up all your stuff, especially if you don't get immediately the validation that you were expecting, because we're all, I think, at the base of us, these creative genius kids that really are just like walking into the kitchen going, look what I made, look what I did, and it's easier when as a kid you have parents that go, oh my god, that's the best thing I ever saw in my life and I'm putting it on the fridge. And I know not all of us had parents like that, but essentially that's what we are at our base, is we're creative kids. So anyway, we're adults and we're like, I have this great idea, I'm going to make this thing and put it in the world and then it's going to do this thing, and then it doesn't do the thing. And so a lot of us then and we're all adults now and we're smart and we got brains and things, and we like, okay, we have a problem, we're going to get a solution. So we go into all these different pathways. And the reason I say all that is that I'm not immune. And so it's at my base, I want to empower other people to know what they know and trust themselves and create their life. But to create that into a business is a process. And so I have had to really teach myself over the 10 years that I've did the first iteration and now in the second iteration, a level of patience and allowance for me instead of getting frustrated with me. That is a part of being authentic. It's like, I am being authentically me, and that doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. And so I can't get frustrated with being me, thinking that if I'm being me, this should work and it should work faster, which I think is what we do. Like, I must be being something that's not correct, that this should speed this up. So it's a process, right? It's a process of putting yourself out there and letting it do nothing, and continuing to put yourself out there with persistency is what I call it, instead of consistency, and not going into doubt or second guessing yourself that maybe you're not being yourself, or maybe you're being something that's turning people off, around things not flying as quickly as you wish they would. To me, that's more the muscle that has to be. One is just being willing to put yourself out there, and you do a lot of coaching around this, right? Your voice and speaking and everything, that's huge. But then once you do it and you still get crickets for a while, then you have to also learn that this is not about you, actually. This is about persistency, continuing to show up, and being willing to continue to expose yourself even when you're not getting the feedback that you wish you had. And so it's a process. So what I'm discovering is that it's a process, and that it does work if you don't give up, and to just, it's like to really trust myself and trust when something needs to slightly pivot, or when I need to slightly adjust my strategy, or when I need to slightly adjust,
Mhm.
some facet of the business building process that doesn't have anything to do with who I am. And that's, to me,
Mm.
is the separation we need to make in business. Is like, there's who you are and you're the gift. And then there's how you package it, and the strategies and the workflows and the things that build the business side of allowing people to pay you for who you are. And if we merge those two things together, I think we get a little trapped. But if we can recognize there's skill building and there's being, and they aren't the same universe, they're just complementary universes that help this thing called business come into the world. So that's my long-winded answer to how's it going. It's going, and I'm in it, and you know
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think genuinely you hit the nail on the head there, because right now, all the talk around manifestation and get into aligned action, and all the talk around, you have to be authentic. And when you are yourself, you're in alignment and
everything's gonna
everything will
work.
flow. Yeah, and there's so much advice like that out there that I absolutely love the way you said it. Who you are and who you are in your business is separate from how you're running your business. And if you have the wrong marketing, the wrong copy, as I'm learning, the wrong copy on your website, the wrong strategies, like, you could still be fantastic. People just don't
Yeah,
see it,
yeah. And each of
right?
us,
So,
speaking of being ourselves, we each have a different way that that's going to work for us too. Like, you've got small children.
mhm.
I don't have small children. I might have more bandwidth for certain strategies than you do. You also might have different abilities. You do have different abilities with things than I do, meaning business is going to create for you in a different way than it's going to create for me. So there's also this thing about being ourselves where to me, it's the lost art of creating something in the world. We're really sold in business that there's an answer to things, like there's a problem and there's a fix. I would say it's more like you've got something you want to create, and now you're discovering your way to do that. And to do that, we have to kind of taste things. Buy this, try this out, take this thing, listen to that thing. We're more like weavers and synthesizers than we are computer programmers.
Yeah, I think that's a very beautiful way to put it. And what I'm thinking of is like, if we were all to go to a buffet, we'd all sample slightly different things and end up with a completely different dinner on our plates, but be fulfilled through
And
what
we
we
would have all had
chose
dinner,
in the
but it
same.
would have been a completely different dinner. What'd
Yeah.
you all do? We had dinner. So one might assume you all had the same
Yeah.
thing. No, no, no. Totally different. I love that.
Yeah. I love that. All right. If you don't mind me asking, then walk me through a little bit more. Tell me more about how you help your clients go through this process. Because from my perspective, it's like such a fundamental thing to understand about yourself, and really, on the one hand, separate yourself from your business. And then on the other hand, like you said it so beautifully, merge the two in a way that works for
Yeah.
you and your
Well,
lifestyle.
it's not a linear process. It's essentially like, who do I have in front of me, and what are they? What we start with the struggle, right? Like, what are you really struggling with? What's really sticking you? Because that's the pain that's brought you into, like, red, white flag, help. So let's start there.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, cool, let's look at that. Is what are, and so I usually start with asking people, like, what are you aware of? Because usually we are aware of something right in the back, something, but we either need someone to
Hmm.
bounce it
Hmm.
off of, or we need someone to ask us or to remind us that we're aware, or we just need that outlet, the person who can actually receive what we're aware of to know it. So I'll usually start there. And then we just kind of look at things. Well, what's really working? What's really not? At the point where something's bugging us, that's usually us aware of something, not a problem. And I really like to distinguish those two things. We don't have problems really. You only have a problem when you invent something into a problem. Otherwise, it's just something that's occurring. It's like, I'm doing this thing and this other thing, and this thing is either not or is occurring. Okay, let's look at the thing. What is the thing? So we start with that. Like, what is it? What can we do with it? Can we? And so we'll ping ideas. I do a whole range of things, from like brainstorming with people to clearing energetic blocks if we need to do that, because sometimes that's happening. Sometimes you're out in the field
Hmm.
and you're just screwed up by beliefs you've got, and it becomes obvious in our conversation. We'll do some of that. And other times it's just really asking you questions. Well, what are you aware of? What do you know? What are you sensing? What's working? What's not working? And a lot of times clarity emerges just from being willing to get present with everything. And then having a thought partner, going, okay, cool, I've been in there. Let's look at this. Is it? And so you'll ping ideas and see, is it this? Is it that? Have you tried? And something will then fly, something will pop and energetically kind of take off. And then that person is unstuck and, able to go the next distance. So it's a really
Yeah,
organic process.
I love that. I love that. Especially the way that you articulated it at the beginning, where really looking at your problem as just a neutral, objective thing that's happening. Like, that's so liberating, even for me. It's like, I find that many people, especially people I tend to work with, they're, I don't want to say
Oh, I
overachievers, but
would I would
definitely
say
a bit
that.
more in that mindset. Yeah. So then when you have problems piling on problems, piling
It's
on problems, piling
it's
on
you can't even
problems, like
handle it.
that's
It's like,
what?
and so I was like, let's
Yeah.
fire ourselves as problem solvers and become weavers instead. Let's look at this from an artist
Yeah.
perspective, where like maybe there's strokes on the canvas that you're like, I don't really, cool, let's paint over it. Screw it. We'll start fresh. And
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. No, I find it's a great way to really be someone who can connect the dots for someone and give them the permission slip that they're waiting for to do the thing that they know
that.
that they should do.
And then there are these other
Yeah.
times, because you use the word should, where we've decided we should do something, and so look at that too. Because a lot of times the stuff we've decided we should do that we're not doing isn't stuff we need to do. So it's another reverse thing
Hmm.
where it's like, I know I should. Should is not a choice. Should is an expectation, and expectations lead to three things only: judgment of you, separation from you, and rejection of you. So I always look at shoulds and I'm go, should you though, or something else?
I love it. You're like a live action Uno reverse card.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So then, working through some of the limiting
Mm.
beliefs that come up for people. I love this topic. I find it's not a topic that's always talked about in terms of like communication, and like it's usually like practical tips to speak with confidence, but so much of it boils down to your
Yeah.
mindset, at least from my perspective. So I would love to ask you a little bit more about how you approach sort of dealing with someone's limiting beliefs and working through that, because again, some of the clients you work with, right, like so many different spheres and so many different domains, but the like at the core, right, even with like my communication clients, it doesn't matter if you're struggling to speak in public or talk to your team, like at the core are these limiting beliefs that are just holding back, like
Well, they hold the energy from flowing.
oh
So, like with what you do in
yeah.
communication and speaking, you need that energy up from your body, like to forward your message. If you're going to do video, it's the same. So that's what limiting beliefs do, is they tamp down the energy, and you have to use all that energy actually to hold the belief in place. So,
Mm.
tell me your question about it, because it's a big topic. I want to know where to start.
Yeah, I guess starting broadly, like how do you tend to tackle limiting beliefs? So, like, I know for myself, it's very much, I love to
Mm.
see patterns in the way that people speak and the way that they think about things. And that's really how I approach working with people to like pinpoint the
Hmm.
belief that I'm seeing. So, just whatever your sort of process
Well,
is for
again,
going
it's
about it.
it's a little bit organic, but I would say that the high level is I recognize that we all have them, and that when
Hmm.
I'm working with somebody, if we keep one of the indicators, obviously, of a belief is if we keep returning to the same thing. You'll hear somebody say the same thing like Even once I can pick up the energy, but especially if they say it again. And that's when I'll say, okay, we need to
Mhm.
actually look at this. Let's look at this because you've now said that twice. So this is a real thing for you. And they'll go, yeah. And that'll usually open it up. And then we can look at it. So my job I say, is to facilitate, is to render easy. I don't really consider myself as a coach. I call myself a coach, but I really consider myself a facilitator. And a facilitator renders easy. And one of the ways of rendering things easy for people is to hear the things they don't hear themselves because we just, we're in our own heads and we say things and we're just unconscious about it. And so I'll hear it and go, okay, that's the second time. So let's look at this. So I'll start with the question, what is this?
Hmm.
Stuff will come out, stuff and things, my mom, my dad, my this, my that. Okay, cool. Would you like to use some energetic tools with this? And usually they'll say yes. And I was like, these are weird. It's going to sound weird. I'll give you a video later. We'll explain it. And then we'll do some clearing, energetic clearing around that. Now, all that does, energetic clearing acknowledges that we can only be stuck by something we've judged. Again, we have to kind of look
Mm.
at, I think, all the different negative connotations we've given the word judgment. So you can only get stuck by something you've decided is real. And that's what judgment is. Judgment is this is real and this is bad. Or judgment is this is real and this is good. So it's polarity. It's either good or bad. So that's where limiting belief comes from, is from a polarized point of view in either direction. And most of the time, limiting beliefs are completely absorbed as reality. So, like what I describe is when we're little, we grow up in these soups. Like your little ones are in your soup now. How did they get so lucky? My little soup, growing up was my poor mom. She was 21 when she had me. My dad was 27. They didn't know what they were doing. And here I come, this little bundle of. She's just out of university trying to figure out how to start a business as a piano teacher. They're broke, so they fight all the time. And then she gets pregnant again and has four more kids. So there's a lot. So my soup was like fighting and scarcity and also strawberries and bread. Like there was great things, but there was a lot of stuff I picked up on as reality. It's just real that money is scarce. That's just reality. I didn't have a question about it. So most of our limiting beliefs come in as presumptive reality, like we presume them to be true because we grew up with them, because it just is true. And those are usually the things we're just functioning from and can't seem to change because they're presumptive. They're like, of course this is true. We all know that money doesn't grow on trees. And I'm just using simple examples, but most of the ones that stick us aren't that simple. They're simple, but they're so much a fabric of our reality that we don't ask them any questions. So that's my job, is to just go, okay, this thing, tell me more about that. And then that's when it starts to unravel. As soon as you get present with something, it will expose itself as true or not true. If you ask something, are you true? And it's not, it will disappear. So that's the
Mhm.
cool thing about beliefs.
Yeah. Okay. A couple cool things I heard for sure. So, to your point, we're growing up in our soups. Typically, from my experience, we're in our soup, but the environment that we're in is a very similar type of soup. So, if we are growing up poor, usually the people around us are
Completely.
poor as
Soup
well,
families.
which then, yeah. And then you're reinforcing the belief that, well, this is the soup for everyone, which makes it that much harder to question the reality. And to your point, I love it. It's true. We don't question it anymore. And then I find it's this weird disconnect where we see examples of people who are in a better
A
soup,
different
a
soup.
healthier soup.
That's a chunky soup. That's an orange
Yeah.
soup. That's
Yeah. And yet we don't really question
no,
why
because
we're not in that soup. We still
exactly,
accept,
because
yeah.
what we've understood is that our soup is reality. And that's really the work that I do with people,
Hmm.
is like I loosen what you've assumed is reality. I facilitate the loosening of what you've decided is reality. And so that you can create your own reality, because that's what's really possible.
Hmm.
But I didn't go to that
Yeah,
school. So, I've had to teach myself.
for sure. No, but it's such an interesting duality that we're able to hold this idea of like, we're always so attached to our reality while still acknowledging like there's these better realities that other people are having, but not like it's so hard for people to merge that. So my question for you would be, for someone who's in that position where perhaps they're at the point where they're like, okay, I know I have some limiting beliefs. I know my soup is expiring, for lack of a better word, but they're stuck. How, like, what would you recommend for someone who's in that position and how to really work through something
Yeah.
on their own?
Well, first, I would encourage you that you don't have to do it on your own because it can be challenging, but I'll give you a little self process. You can only be
Hmm.
so the first thing you want to discover is like what's sticking me. You want to ask yourself a question. What's sticking me? Where am I stuck? Not where. Don't ask where. That'll be
Hmm.
confusing. Just ask what is sticking me. If you ask that a few times and you just stay present with it, you could even journal that if you want to, if you're on your own. You're going to find out what's sticking you. And so, right at the bottom of that journal exercise or whatever exploration you do is going to be the thing. And it could be so many different things. I hate my job. I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. I want to build a business, but it's not working, or I wish I had my voice. I mean, it just could be 82 million things. What's sticking me? So then once you have what's sticking you, the second question is like, well, what do I want to create? Essentially, what do I want? So I know I'm stuck, but what is it that I'm looking at that I think is better than this? What do I want to create? What do I want to have? And those two questions alone could be a bit of a process because you might not have really asked yourself that. And the reason I start there instead of what are your limiting beliefs is because if you don't know what you want to create, it doesn't really matter what your beliefs are. Your beliefs are going to get exposed in the process of creating what you want to create. You think you want to create a business? I say do it. All your stuff's going to come up in the process. You will not have to invite it in. It will just be there. Because that choice to create something will facilitate you becoming more of you. And when your beliefs are coming up, that is you becoming more of you. That is the stuff that would have held you back before coming up going, roadblock, roadblock. And you're like, and now you're willing enough to have this new thing that you look at the roadblocks and you're like, am I going to stop here? Am I going to build a house right in front of the road? Maybe not. Let's deal with those. So then let's just say you are aware that you have some. You just want to sit with what's my limiting belief? And you want to ask it, are you real? Are you real? Yes or no? Are you true? Yes or no?
Hmm.
It is
Sounds so
simple,
simple,
and
but
it
it's
might be some of the deepest work that you ever do. And that's why I find it helpful to do it with somebody, which is the only reason I said it, because it is sometimes the hardest part about this work is the muscle of being brutally honest with yourself, because we've really developed
Mhm.
this way of kind of overrunning that. And also, we're just so smart. We can just talk ourselves out of anything.
Well, that's why I ask what your advice is, because for many people, the DIY approach is the very
Of
first
course.
and only
Of
approach
course.
they would like to take, right? Because we are smart people who can figure it out. But I love your point because it's true. When we sit down and we actually ask these questions, the answer is likely not going to come up from my experience because it is a limiting belief and we're not going to just acknowledge it. Exactly. It's the layers, it's the 5 why approach, right? Okay, why do I believe this? Okay, but why do I believe this? Okay, but why? And so from my experience, I find there's quite a lot of resistance to that initial
Yeah.
self-discovery and opening it up, and really it's
It,
quite a process. And I find it
I'm
takes a
sorry. I'm
while,
just
yeah, to
excited.
get on
Yeah.
board with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, it's a process. And
yeah.
also, it's like, I know for me that a lot of times we are facing these really uncomfortable self beliefs, like stuff that we're pretty sure is true. And so we don't want to look at it. So to force ourselves to look
Mhm.
at it, and we know we need to, but we don't. So then it's so easy to keep ourselves distracted with social media and kids and family and life. And like the distractions in life are never ending. So that's the thing about having a person is just like it kind of forces you to get present with it. And the beliefs that I've shifted that have changed my life the most are the ones that I was 100% sure were true. And they hurt me badly, that it was so painful that it was true. It turns out when I got present with it, it wasn't true, but I was so sure that it was true that I would not look at it. And so, there's just been a lot of that over the last 10 years. So if that's you, if you're in a process and you want to self do it, because there's a lot you can get to. But if you know there's something you can't get to, don't be afraid to reach out, because there are people that can get present with you and not judge with something that you're sure is
Mhm.
true. It won't be. But if you need to face it and you need that energy to dissipate, like that's what I'm saying. Don't try to do that by yourself.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, my journey started very much with the DIY approach, and it was several years in the space of the DIY, and like I now refer to it as
Yeah.
the gray area. I don't know if there's a like actual term for this, but what I find is like you started and you said like you have this like one little tangible thing that you like for yourself. And so you start this process of self-development and digging deep, and the more you get, the more everything starts to unravel. And then I find you get to this area, like this gray area where you're like, I'm tired. Like, I'm not where I want to be, but all this self development is exhausting. And there's so much more than I thought. And like, what did I do?
Yeah,
I
I
can't go
know.
back to my old life because I can see how wrong it was. I'm not at my new life. And you're sort of like in this gray area of like,
I call it the messy
oh,
middle, where you've left the
yeah,
shore of your old life and you're not at the new shore
yeah,
yet, but you're right in the middle. And it's a lot.
yeah, it is. Is I call it like the gray area burnout because you're just like, I didn't know I was so terrible. Like, what do I do?
Yeah. And I'd like to just add a question into that because a lot, I actually had forgotten about that, but you're right. Like, once you start really, I guess, adding in all this self awareness, the first phase, first, whatever, 50th phase, you know, is that
Yeah.
your first thoughts are usually going to be, wow, I didn't realize how terrible I am. But I'd like to invite all of you to ask a new question, and it's this: it's what's right about me I'm not getting?
Hmm.
Because we tend
That's a good one.
to, it's like our first, I don't know, we tend to first cover up what we think is wrong with us. And so that'll be kind of the first stuff that we find when you're doing self awareness. We tend to find all the stuff that's wrong with us, right? Like our procrastination habits and our talking over our spouses and our, I don't even know, all these things, right? And that's the light stuff. But right underneath there is the beauty, right underneath there. And that's the part that I don't think we talk enough about. Like, that's what's underneath all the judgment. That's actually the part we don't really want to receive. None of us really want to receive how great we are and what a gift we are. That's the thing we're avoiding. So we cover it up with all this self-judgment because surely that can't be true. Surely we can't be great. Because if, and here's the very lower bits of this that we don't usually get to, because if I was great, then the people in my life would have loved me. They would have received me. They would have allowed me to be me. That's the logic of a child, which isn't true.
Yep.
But as a child, that's what we start to
Yep.
develop as a set of beliefs of like, well, there must be something wrong with me and I'm going to find it because I'm a perfectionist and an overachiever. And so I will find it. And then we find it and then we die because of like, that's all there is just what's wrong with me. Like, and I'm done.
No thanks. Yeah. No, it's a good point because also it's like the years, if not decades, of layers building up of being, your boundaries being overcrossed or mistreated or someone saying, I love you and then treating you poorly. It is hard to get to that place of like, well, if I am so great at my core, not only like how did this happen, but like how did I
Mhm.
allow this to happen if I was so great? And that's a very
And the thing
hard
is,
place
that's
to
not even
be.
true. They're not partnered together. They're not married, those two things. You're great and people are crappy and they're not married, but they feel married.
Do. They
And
very much
that's our
do.
biggest challenge, I think, is unmarrying those two things. Like, okay, and it circles us back around to where we started of being ourselves. What's it going to take for me to be willing to be me and let people be people?
Mm,
And a lot of these people are the people closest to us. I think that's probably the people we have the hardest time with because we've put so much meaning onto their receiving or no receiving of us. And usually it's no receiving, unfortunately. So that's been really meaningful. That's
mhm.
been really hurtful. That's created a lot of these things and stuffs we had to overcome. So I think a lot of our work is to unglump those two things and really look at what's it going to take for me to be willing to be me without any validation from anybody, especially the people that I have made the most meaningful in my life.
Yes. No, actually, that's like a very important point I want to emphasize more, because what I find also is the people closest to us, we have the most expectations, as you said, but they have also placed us
Of
within
course.
their expectations. And so what ends up happening is when we are working on ourselves, they're usually the biggest critics and the most judgmental of us. And that fact alone is very hard to reconcile for a lot of people, especially when you're in that, messy middle and you're like working on yourself. And it's like, well, why aren't you supporting me? Like, why aren't you seeing the vision that I'm seeing and the growth that I want to experience? And how dare you, in a sense? And it's a very difficult place to be in. And I find that for many people, it's hard to push through that because you expect the people closest to you to support you. And when they're not and you need it the most, it's quite a challenging transition, I would say. But just to wrap up on that point, from the other end, what I find is the people on the other hand who are not supporting you, who are your closest people, they have a perception of you. They have put you in a box and they have, beliefs around what your relationship has been like and what it will continue to be like based on what it's been. So when all of a sudden you're shifting, that is completely threatening to them and going outside of their, comfort zone in a sense. And that's where all of that fear and criticism comes through. And so what I like to say to people when I work with my clients is, as you're changing and as you see these things for yourself, you can almost anticipate the people closest to you
Yeah.
not supporting you. And you almost have to just like brush it off a little bit and move on and be your own internal supporter until you get to such a point of changing that they have no option but to recognize you for the
Yeah,
change
and I
that you
can
have
tell you
gone
from
through.
experience that that doesn't always happen either. Not to put a damper on the
Mm,
conversation, but to
yeah,
support your point of like you really do have to discover in yourself a willingness to be you regardless, because it doesn't always
mm,
happen. You know, my I am close with one of
yeah,
my four siblings, and the rest of my family is estranged. They just do not get me. They don't grok me. They don't get me. They don't support me. They don't approve of me, and so for me, the hardest part of we talked about being brutally honest, and don't if you don't fret if you need a person to help you do that, because the hardest thing for me to face, I did not want to know it, was the unkindness of the people around me. I didn't want to know that that was true about them. I really wanted to believe that
yeah,
I was the one with the problem so that I never had to face what was true about other people. So that was harder than probably anything else. So that's another reason we layer self judgment and beliefs on top of ourselves, is so that we don't have to face what's really true. Because what's really true sometimes isn't that pretty. So it's
yeah.
just a part of the process. And I'm not sure how we segue out of that now that I've said it. But
No, it's true. But it's like, yeah, it's to your earlier point, right? As you're sitting there doing the journal work, you need to find something to motivate you towards the change, right? Something that's so much bigger than what you're even willing to let yourself believe at the moment, that it propels you through the messy middle and all the discomfort that comes. I don't know. It's a hard place to be for sure because it's motivating on the one hand to have this big vision, but hard all
yeah,
on its
yeah.
own
And
in
you know
its
what I
own.
have to look at? Maybe this will help you too. It helps me. I read a little
Yeah.
thing in a book somewhere that's not helpful, but it was about I think it was from Gary Douglas. I studied him for a long time, where he was changing his life. He had been a real estate agent for a long time, making six figures, and then I think the market dropped out, and he got to this point in his life where he was around my age, and he's like, okay, well, I've done it all. I think at that point he'd been married twice, he'd had five businesses and done everything. What else is possible? And one of the questions, he asked himself a few key questions, but one of them was, what would be rewarding for me? And
Oh,
that word has always stuck with me, because when you are really leaving the shore of your old reality and moving towards the shores of your new reality, or you're forming your reality, which really is more of a spacious thing than a water thing, um,
hmm,
and it doesn't have a lot of form, it is uncomfortable. You're learning a lot, you're changing a lot, you've lost your reference points a lot of times for what should be or is. You're creating all of it. And so the rewarding part has really kind of been a North Star for me. because it might not be easy in the moment and it might not be incredibly fun in the moment all the time, because you are starting to face being honest with yourself and, learning new stuff and being awkward and all those things. But it might be the only way you can choose to live.
Mm.
Because when I look at, I was talking to my brother the other day, and he said, and we're probably the most similar, but he said, but you have an insane ability and tolerance for risk. I thought, you're right. I just kind of leap off cliffs. Like and I keep doing it. And this year, at 49, and I only bring up my age because it seems relevant to some people. And I do feel different, but I still have this, like, there's really only one way for me to live. I can't go backward or try to do normal living like I see other people do. There's only really one way for you as you to live. And so if you look at, would I choose anything else? Or is this really rewarding to me? You start to gift yourself the genius of what you're choosing rather than the
Mhm.
grayness of what you're choosing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the permission slip that we all need to really muddle through. Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. So
Yes.
you've developed Shift. Um, could you give us like a high level overview of Shift?
Yeah. So I was just trying to look at, how do I put words to an energetic method that doesn't really have words? And
Hmm.
when I came up with the title Money Shift, which is going to change this week, I got a little more clarity. And this is the art of business. You form
Yeah.
something, you get awareness, you go into it, and you iterate. So I'm definitely in the formative, stormative, iterative phase. But what remains the same is the way that I work. So shift is to study your true operating style. So you really want to start really noticing how you function, not as something that's wrong with you, but as something that's right about you.
Mm. I'm going to pause you there. I absolutely love that because as someone who considers themselves to be a high achiever and having gone through like graduate school, having two kids and running a business and all these things, productivity is something that you dig into and everyone has a lot of similar advice that doesn't work for everyone. And so what I found for myself, what really, really changed the game was understanding that I am different in the way that I work. I So one thing I started doing is really tracking my natural energy
I love
levels,
that.
right? So like yeah, like for myself, I get up, I have to get the kids ready, drop them off. It's like a whole whirlwind is just how I think of it. And then I need to sit down and have a cup of coffee and really like mellow out before I can work for, a period of 2 hours and then I crash. And so just understanding that, I used to feel a lot of guilt around like, well, this is not the way to be productive. I will not be successful. Like other people are working 9 to 8 and right. So giving myself the freedom and the permission to do that alone, just those little tweaks change the way that I'm approaching work. But then the other thing that I realize is for anyone who's into human design, so I'm a reflector and I'm very much like, ooh, all over the place. And so schedules are really hard for me because even if I plan to do something, my mood will change and I'll be like, I don't feel inspired to do that thing anymore. I want to do this other thing. And so forcing myself to work and like go through these periods just like burnt me out for a
Yeah.
very long time. And so yeah, to your point, like really understanding how I operate, it just gave me so much freedom and like that permission slip. It just really gave me that permission slip to
I
function how
love
I
that you
like to
discovered
function.
that on your own. That's what I
Yeah.
would call an incredible amount of allowance for yourself, and that's really what this pillar of the method does. Is it starts to generate in your own world allowance for you. And allowance is different than acceptance. We've really been taught that acceptance, that you have to accept yourself, which is kind of thuddy. It's kind of like it's got a
Mm.
negative connotation that I just have to accept this about me. But allowance is where everything's just interesting. I'm just an interesting creature, and instead of judging me, I'm going to observe me. So I love that you did that. I
Mm.
doing something similar, and as we age too, it changes. As your kids grow, your energy levels change, and so I was for a long time not paying attention to that and just hammering like I always had been, wondering why I felt so strung out all the time. Energy levels have changed. And so I need to navigate my life different. So it's just about studying what's right about you and how can you use it to your advantage.
Yeah.
And the H I put
Mhm.
for habit form the tools that you can use with yourself. And the reason I put habit form is it's not entirely accurate because, but it's like having a big enough base of tools that you can use with yourself for the things that really do stick you. So, for example, you might get
Mm.
wrapped around a tree around something that doesn't bother me at all. So, you might need a tool
Yep.
to use with you around, I can't even think of an example, but, procrastination, or that I just don't need it. It's not something I struggle with. But it's like, because you've been studying yourself and you kind of get the way you operate, you have more information and self-awareness to know where you get stuck and on what you tend to get stuck, and how you can work with yourself to either unstick it or just have allowance for being stuck. So that's what I mean by habit forming. It's like, with this new information of yourself, you can kind of be strategic with the tools that you leave in the room for when you might need them.
Yeah.
And then
I
in
love that.
the I, oh, am I talking over you? I had to change the screens. The I is
You're good.
invest in asking the right expansive questions. So
Hmm.
questions open up space, answers close down space. And we are taught to go find answers. In fact, we only ask questions that have answers, and a true question has no answer.
Mind blown. No, it's true. It's so true because the first thing that popped into my head was like, if I'm experiencing a problem with my business, I go find the one solution and I'm now boxing myself into the specific way this one marketer is teaching to do his marketing that I must now apply to my business rather than the leeway
And what
to keep it
happens when that
open.
one way doesn't
That
work? Who's wrong?
it
You're
sucks
wrong
and then I'm
because you
wrong.
can't get the way to work. But is that actually true? And
Exactly.
that's where we screw ourselves up, especially with business. I think this business is
Yeah.
such a minefield of, this kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, so
Yeah.
it's like, you want to invest in yourself and learning how to ask expansive, opening questions. Just a great example is like, what else is possible here that I haven't considered? And then go do the dishes.
Mm.
Go take your baby for a walk. Like, go have a coffee. Don't try to answer it with your mind, which is the other thing we're taught to do in school. So we have to really kind of unschool ourselves. We need to unschool ourselves from trying to find answers and really school ourselves in the art of question, because question is going to open up possibilities. And I've learned over the last 10 years, and something I work with my clients on, is to learn to trust yourself, that when you've asked, the universe delivers. Ask and receive is a true thing. It's not a made up thing. It actually happens. So when you actually ask, and asking is just if it's a true question, if it has no answer, you will get awareness, and things come in, they ping, they pop, they blur into your world. You just get a sense that you need to talk to this person. You get a sense that you need to go this direction. And that sensory ability that we have is the thing that this method brings back alive, that we've shut down with all of our thinking and, intellect has kind of destroyed that art. But we have it still. We have those abilities. So it's to strengthen those abilities so that we can lead ourselves forward.
Yeah. And to really sit in the silence of not having an
Yes, which can
answer.
be
Like
uncomfortable.
I said
Back
before.
circling back around to
Yeah.
the messy middle, right? Where there are no
Oh yeah.
answers there, but there are great questions.
Mhm.
So learning those. And then forming routines that drive growth and momentum. This one is a little bit more structured, and it has a little more leeway in it than I've written there. But to form, you're creating your reality. And most of us are also creating a thing. Most of us are creating a business. Or if we're not creating a business, we're creating a career path, or we're creating a relationship, we're creating a family, we're creating something. And so it's really more looking at, what are the little daily things that I can choose that would move this creation forward. A silly example is,
Mm.
my husband and I are really teaching we are storming and firming now ourselves as well. We've been married 5 years, but I feel like we're just learning how to communicate as people at 50 years old. So, I've got
Mhm.
3 books, and we're like, 3 times a week, we are sitting ourselves down and just taking a section out of a book and practicing some stuff. And that's just a choice to form a little routine to build momentum in our relationship where there just wasn't any before. We were kept hitting all these brick walls. And I sat myself down and I'm like, what else is possible that I haven't considered, literally? Because I was,
Mm,
like, in relationships in particular, it can be really frustrating. You just like keep trying the same thing and you don't get anywhere. And it's like, well, then the only answer is to separate if it's not working. But if that wasn't the answer, if there was something else, what would it be? Great question. So what floated into
yeah.
my world were, well, you could study this. And I was like, oh, I study everything else. I've got books on sales and coaching and business stuff. And he's got all these books on like nutrition and food and working out. And he loves that. We've never once thought of buying books on relationships. Anyway, I bought these 3 books and now we're doing that. So that's what I mean by forming routines that drive growth and momentum is like, where do you want to be growing and what just one thing could you add that would forward motion that creation of yours and create something new?
I love that. I feel like what comes to mind for me, like exercise and fitness. If you want to run a marathon, you can't run for 10 minutes once a week. At the very least, run 12 minutes the next week, right? Like you have to have those habits and those routines, and building them up is so important because otherwise you lose all momentum and all progress and then spiral even worse than
100%.
when you
But to
started.
circle back around to something you said
Yeah.
about, noting your energy levels, it's also
Mm,
recognizing that there are seasons where routines are going to go out the window. Having
yeah.
babies is a great example of that. Um, I am sure you have stories. For us, it was international moves. We did 5 international moves in the last 5 years. It was so much. For me, perimenopause has been a lot because
Mm,
what you based your knowledge of yourself on has literally fundamentally changed. And so I do
yeah.
think it's worth saying that, yes, you want to like, so that might not be the season to train for a marathon.
Yeah. For sure. But it might be the season to continue with
Or
yoga
something.
or
Exactly.
something.
Or
If
learn how
fitness
to care for
comes
yourself
up.
in a completely new way that you never even considered. So that's a part
Yeah.
too of the method is including yourself as an organism that goes through phases and seasons and, allowing for that instead of like judging yourself when that occurs.
That's beautiful. So permission
Yeah.
slip
And
again.
then the last one I put is just teach yourself to embody money in every decision. And I do this really cool workshop called the How to
Mm,
Become Money Workbook. And it's about
mhm.
becoming money, but it's not what you think. It's like all of us have these really fixed ideas of what money is. And money is really just where you're being you, the power that you are,
Mhm.
the creativity that you are, the knowing that you are with all of your senses, willing to take total leadership of your life. And when you choose that, everything can show up when it can, and how it can. So there's my word.
Yeah. Love it. I love it. I have, I want to say minimal familiarity with the concept of becoming money, but anyone interested, I would definitely recommend checking it out with Crystal. It is quite the interesting concept to go through. I won't say it like
Cool.
that.
We'll leave it there.
Anything else you'd like to add or touch upon?
I don't think so. I mean, thank you for this
Okay,
conversation.
well,
Wow.
yes. Before we wrap up, what would be your 5 letter word today?
Shift. I would just say, what
Yeah.
would it take for you to allow everything to shift? If you didn't have to hold
Yeah.
anything in place, you didn't have to hold you to any standard. If you didn't have to hold the past in place, if you didn't have to hold a future in place, and you could allow everything to kind of move like the earth does. The earth is just a bunch of tectonic plates always moving.
Mm,
What would that loosen up in your world? What would that give you access to? What choices would you have available? And what permission to be yourself would you have the freedom to choose?
yeah. I love that. Okay. For anyone interested in connecting with you, where would you recommend they find you, or what would be
Well,
the
you can
next
find me on
steps?
LinkedIn. You can find me on YouTube, and you can go to the website, crystaljoycrawford.com. My name is spelled Christ, E-L, Joy Crawford. But yeah, I'm all over social, Instagram, Facebook.
Perfect. And I'll link all of those in
Yes.
the show description. Awesome. Any final words?
Thanks for being amazing. All of you listening, and you,
Oh, thank you.
yeah,
Thank you so much for being
thanks for
here.
having me.
Awesome.